Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Artifact, our podcast here at AlUla FM, the sound of Arabia. I have with us Mr. Abu Bakr Garba, who is one of Saudi Arabia's most premier sustainable urban developers and architects. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Joshua. Really, thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure as well. Abu Bakr, you have experiences from all over the world. If you can give us a quick rundown of who you are, where you've been, and how you got here.
So just to start with my personal background, so I am from Nigeria, a little small town on the northeast called Yola. Like my personal background is from there. So, I don't want to perpetuate this idea of Nigeria, the single story of being, a place of poverty. It's actually a really beautiful place. But, just growing up, there was a lot of, scarcity, chaos, kind of impermanence. And that was really how I grew up. And then eventually I moved to Dubai to study architecture. And I did 5 years of architecture study there, eventually, leading to my kind of culmination in my thesis project in a design of a living accommodation for, foreign workers, because as we know, there's a little bit of a huge population of that place as foreign workers. And then after that, I went to pursue a master's in development and emergency practice from Oxford Brookes University, Center for Development and Emergency Practice. And then eventually I came to Saudi a little over 3 years ago to start working here as an urban planner.
Very, very nice. And Abu Bakr, you work with one of the big urban planners. And what drew me to you and really to beg you to be on our podcast today was one initiative that you're involved in, which is very interesting and very dear to me. Can you tell us more about your greening project in Nigeria that you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. So again, it starts really again from a very deeply personal place. So I was home, one Eid holiday, just sitting with my grandfather, and we saw a few sandstorms. And then he was telling me about how, there never used to be sandstorms in this part of the country. But now all of a sudden we're having multiple, within a span of a few months. And so that just really got me curious, and I started looking into why these sandstorms are happening. Of course, I have a little bit of an idea of, desertification, land degradation, living in this part of the world, which is also affected for a while. But then that little bit of research led me into a very deep rabbit hole that showed me the scale, severity, and kind of complexity of the issue, right? So just to give you, a bit of context, so Nigeria basically loses to land degradation, land around 300,000 hectares, which is more or less double the size of London every single year. So that's a really big issue, right?
Wow.
And I just thought, I had the professional experience, I had the academic training, but also this is literally my hometown. Right? So what can I do about it? And that's when we thought, maybe we can just start by planting a few trees, because if deforestation is causing desertification, then the really simple answer is so obvious, right? Plant more trees instead of cutting them down. And we thought it was going to be that simple, we just go around planting trees. But oh my God, little did we know that was the easiest part of it. But nonetheless, over the last 3 years, we've planted thousands of trees across, about, I think, 42 communities now. And little communities. So these are like little settlements, little kind of nomadic settlements where people, so the nomadic culture of that area is primarily the Fulani people, and they move around a lot. So we engage with them a lot to see whatever they have, like a little camping. How can we make sure that by the time they live there, the land that they live is a little bit better than what they found, right? And so we do this in schools, in university campuses, university communities, all across the region. And we've been doing that, just the tree planting. But then a little bit into that, we started to realize, so it's one thing to plant the trees, but the real hard work begins, after, like how do you maintain and how do you ensure that you're not just, planting a tree and then leaving it and only for it to die a couple of weeks later, right? But how do you actually ensure that this tree will be taken care of so that they can thrive and actually contribute and give back to the ecosystem. And so therefore we started like a new education and awareness kind of program to be able to make sure that whatever these communities that we're working with tree planting, they also understand and appreciate the kind of the hard work that is required to really ensure that these trees are like surviving and maximizing their impact, but also ensuring that they're sustainable in the long term.
And so, like, when it comes to this type of initiative, it's driven by a need that a lot of people might not be aware of. We kind of imagine that wild areas or green areas are kind of destroyed or they're replaced by skyscrapers, or they're replaced by roads, or they're replaced by schools or libraries or mosques, churches, whatever they may be. What is the real reason that's causing desertification? Is it really the construction of buildings or of the construction of roads? Because I think a lot of people are under the assumption that, yeah, if we didn't have so many buildings, we didn't have so many roads, if our cities weren't so big, we wouldn't be facing desertification.
Oh, and I can definitely see that. But I mean, so obviously, I mean, I work in construction, so we know the environmental impact of construction, right? And it is really a big issue, but it is also at the same time a little bit of a misconception because that is not the main driver. Unfortunately, the real issue is around what we eat. It's about agriculture. And then you also talked about need. And I think the way to understand the need is really to speak to community members, right? So I'll give you an example of the context of where we started in Little Yola in Nigeria. It's a place, like I said, of a lot of scarcity, right? So there's a lot of underdevelopment. Not a lot of people have, sustenance and money. There's a bit of poverty there. And so when we started this, we really didn't think that people would appreciate trees, right? So why would I give you a tree and ask you to take care of it when you don't have enough food to eat or enough money to survive, right? And then the first few times we went to the community, we had a little bit of a chat with them, like a little stakeholder engagement. And that's when really the light bulbs kind of lit, right? Because then you suddenly start to hear these stories from people. Every single person had a sentimental attachment to one tree species or not, stories of how they grew up on this. And then they fell at some point, they broke their arm. Some people used to hide behind the trees to do this. Every single person had a story to tell with this. But then also at the same time, there was like a very, very deep sense of sadness as to why these things are not there anymore without a real explanation, right? And so you start to talk about more and more with people, and then you realize it really is, like I said earlier, about agriculture. So most of land degradation and desertification comes as a result of agricultural practices.
Globally, not just Nigeria.
Globally, not just Nigeria. And just to give you a little bit of context around that as well. So of the, all of the habitable land in the world, about 50% of that we use for agriculture. To add a bit more context, less than 2% is used for all urban settlements.
So you could
imagine the scale of that.
All of the world's urban population in only 2% of the land, but you're saying 50% of all land is not enough for our current agricultural consumption.
And that's where the real issue is. And it's not just that, it's and my Fulani ancestors would be rolling in their graves for me saying this. We absolutely have to eat less meat. Because just to put a bit of
less context. Abu Bakr?
Yeah. No, I can repeat that.
Less meat.
Yeah. But just to give you, because I mean, the Fulani people, we have a proverb that says, Pullo kamse kusel be kosam, which roughly translates to, for the Fulani, there's only meat and milk.
Yes.
So entire dietary practices.
A lot of people, I think, feel that way about
revolves around that. But half of the agriculture that we actually produce, we use to feed the dairy that we actually eat. So why have that extra layer when you could actually just take the calories for ourselves, right? So that's a bit of a challenging issue. But that's the main driver probably of land degradation and desertification. And it's also like, there's another misconception about what desertification really is. And most people think it's just these large dunes of desert taking over cities, like Mad Max territory. We're not quite there, and hopefully we will just keep that to the big screens. But really, it's not really about large desert dunes. It's not about large desert dunes. It's about really losing habitable land, like fertile land, to other stuff. So it could be for cutting down trees for energy. It could be also for overgrazing. It could be unsustainable agricultural practices and a lot of issues. But yeah, the real main driver of this is not really construction, but agriculture. So there is no path to sustainable future where we don't have to rethink how we produce the food that we eat.
Your training is in developing emergency strategies for cities and urban settings. What kind of emergencies are you trained to kind of mitigate, and what kind of strategy, what kind of crises are you imagining for the future as far as the urban setting or cities are concerned?
So in terms of currently, so I mean, of course, there's like a wide scale of different kind of complex issues, right? But the real kind of common thread that we found recently, in the type of work that we do is really the interconnectedness of everything. Right? So when we talk about drought, for example, drought is almost directly linked to flood, because even though they're like literally opposite things technically, right? But everything seems to be connected in this giant kind of vicious cycle of pain and suffering for some people, for the most vulnerable people really amongst our communities. But we talk about, so for example, I mean, I'll just stick with the drought because that's the most recent one that we've been engaging with. For the last couple of months, there were no rains whatsoever in Nigeria. We lost a lot of agricultural land because of this. And then all of a sudden, the raining season comes back, and because the soil has been so dried and compacted, it gets flash floods, right? And we lost people because of this. And so we've been trying to kind of see how we can first and foremost like deal with community members, because they're not usually just the victims, they're the first responders, and they're the ones with the most history, right? And just to give you an example
And
of
the
why
ones with the most to lose.
exactly,
Because they live in these
exactly.
danger zones.
And that's why the first step is really always to listen to them. And another example of why if you don't do this, things can really go bad is quite a while ago there was a situation in that part of the world where we needed, basically food security was an issue, but a certain billionaire who will remain nameless, who was obsessed with malaria, wanted to donate to solving malaria issues, right? And the community people told him no, like there's more pressing issues here. But then he was like, they had all of the statistics from their scientists and all of their researchers, which by the way, it's fair analysis, right? Like malaria is a real issue. We know this. I know this. But it wasn't the pressing issue then. But they ended up donating malaria nets to these people anyway, right? And then these people used the malaria nets instead as fishing nets. Eventually, exactly, eventually contaminating the river and just creating an even worse cycle of disaster. So really the first step is dealing with
Listening to
the communities, understanding what people need, and then whatever design intervention you're going to propose, make sure that there's accountability to the population that you are serving, because they're not
buy-in from your stakeholder, from the beneficiary.
Absolutely. Because I mean, without them, it will not work anywhere, right? And so, really, just to answer your question, there isn't like one specific type of disaster, because most of them are really interconnected. If you have one issue, it almost directly leads to another issue, and then it just creates a vicious cycle of different types of scarcity, chaos, and in some cases actually insurgency. So you look at a little bit of the issues we have in the Lake Chad region. So this is northern Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and Niger as well. It is almost directly linked to the drying up of the Lake Chad. So since the 1960s, the Lake Chad, which is like the biggest source of water for those fresh water for those 5 countries, has really dried up about 80%, which is a really scary thing, right? And so because people don't have water, it means there isn't agriculture, which means there isn't food, which means there isn't economic activity, and this is why some people end up taking illegal ways to make a sustenance, and we see this across the world as well, right? So desertification is an issue there, but it's also really an issue here that we're dealing with. The COP16 that was just held in Saudi Arabia in December last year, which is like an incredible kind of effort from the kingdom, the Ministry of Water and Environment, because traditionally desertification and land degradation has been seen as a kind of a little sister of the 3 Rio Conventions, right? So it's almost climate change first, biodiversity second, and then desertification third. But what really will happen at COP, the scale of the issue was put on for the whole world to see, and now we really understand how deep it is, how severe it is, and we're doing things about it appropriately.
And so, Abu Bakr, when you're planning as a urban planner, who's obviously very invested in sustainability, and who's also invested in not only the environmental sustainability, but the social kind of cultural sustainability of these, urban planning efforts. When it comes to greening in urban settings, what do you think is the most appropriate approach that cities around the world should adopt when it comes to greening? Of course, every city is in a different environment, has a different socioeconomic situation, has a different environmental climate situation. But is there kind of like a general approach that most cities could adopt, for instance, 60% of or 70% of, in order to endeavor or dip their toes in urban greening?
And again, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I'm going to come back to community.
Yes.
Because it's always people at the center of every intervention that you design, right? So we found that from our planting, right? Whenever we plant trees within residential compounds, there's a substantially high rate of survival than trees we plant in public areas. It's simply because if it's in your compound, if it's in my house, I'm going to take care of it. This applies as a general principle, right? So how do you ensure participatory design? How do you ensure community engagement? How do you ensure accountability to the people that you're serving, right? And that's, I think, is at the core of the principle. So participatory design is the fancy word that we use in the urban the design kind of industry. And I think that's at the heart of it. And again, so because when we talk about sustainability, we tend to think these are kind of new principles that came about, with the Rio Convention or with some United Nations
It's been around for thousands of years.
But it has been along. Like I was just speaking to a colleague the other day. There's a hadith that says that like if you have a seedling in your hand and then the end hour comes, not to misquote, paraphrase a hadith, but it says you should plant it anyway.
Yes.
Right? And that this was said 1,400 years ago.
Yes.
And this is deeply ingrained in the civilization.
Even taking an ablution in
minimize water.
Yes.
Exactly. Minimize waste. And this is how you really have to deal with people. Because again, when you come to and you're building around, especially in the kind of semi-urban areas, right? Where there isn't a lot of governance, let's say, it's really, really, really crucial that you have to ensure that the people that are there buy into this and they take care of it. And then the way to do that is to make them understand that this is not a new concept, like kind of reteach it as part of, it is part of our culture, it is part of our civilization. But more importantly, even because most people really take the spirituality as the deepest sense of the identity, right? It is part of that as well. Sustainability is not a new thing. It wasn't invented by the United Nations. It has always been part of our culture, and we really have to celebrate that. And that's how you get people, I think, to really buy in and to ensure that they take care of
all the tools we've made is somehow in service of conserving and protecting.
Yes.
And all the tools, whether it's a rope or to pull up a bucket that conserves the water in order for you to have sustain. The whole way we design our lives, our lifestyle is based around this concept. In fact, some of our favorite foods and flavors are based in our need to conserve and consume food in a sustainable way, whether it be cheese for consuming dairy, for preserving dairy, or yogurt for preserving dairy, or if it's pickling for preserving sort of fruits and vegetables, if it's jelly making, like all those things that we associate with being homey were really just strategies to preserve and have sustainable diets. And I want to come back to diet. Because you said something very important, which was that people should consume less meat. And I want to know, okay, even if I consumed less meat, Abu Bakr is not going to consume less meat. What difference is it going to make?
So again, the difference is in scale, because I don't, there's this idea, because we can be pessimistic and doomist about it, right? Saying, it doesn't matter if I do this, everybody's going to do this. If everybody thought one way or another, then that's when we really get the critical mass and to make the impact, right? So I don't have an answer for this. I'm not going to pretend I do, because again, it's about raising awareness, it's about education, it's about just persuading people on a very large scale to actually reach the tipping point. But it's important to understand, again, going back to a little bit of the hadith as well, right? Planting the tree at the end of the world is really not going to do anything.
Nothing, yeah.
But the idea is still that we have to conserve. We have to
be a part of the solution.
We have to be a part of the solution rather than to be a problem. And the idea of kind of, being a little bit doomist about it really gives in to the people who are on the other end of the spectrum who actually don't even believe in climate change, right?
Yes.
And so would you rather be helping them or helping people who actually are trying to make the world a better place?
Yes.
And let's say we don't. Let's say climate change is not a real thing. Let's say eating meat doesn't actually, benefit. So, but it doesn't actually make an impact. But really, what does that mean? We're creating a better world for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's for nothing. We're still creating a better world, and that's something in itself.
I think it's a pursuit that's very, very important. And you can always go home or go to sleep or go to your deathbed knowing that at least I tried my best to be a part of the solution.
Absolutely.
I'd rather be a small part of the solution than be a big part of the problem.
Absolutely.
And so I think that is a very noble.
And just to add to that as well, because I remember also one of the first things they really taught us in development and emergency practice, the first principle you approach any project with is do no harm. That's always a starting point, because there are cases where you go in thinking you're actually helping people or helping the situation only to make things worse. And the way to do that is by educating yourself, is by understanding and appreciating the context of the specific context that you're working in, because really everything is unique in its own way, right?
Yes.
And so that principle of doing no harm, I think, is a very strong one that we can apply here, but also in other things as well.
So, Abu Bakr, I want to ask you, there are some historical cases in which cities have greatly suffered and in fact been abandoned. Entire civilizations have been lost. And some people, some scientists, some historians, some anthropologists, some urban architects like yourself, after studying these situations, have argued that perhaps it was overconsumption or it was climate change that ultimately dealt them that fate. And we've seen it in the jungles of Central America. It's being seen in, all over Asia, Africa, Europe. I mean, this example almost exists on every continent that human beings have occupied. So as an urban planner, and I mean, I know that you're all about being positive, but it's not like this hasn't happened before, or it's not like as if it hasn't potentially happened before. And so how do we seriously make sure that it doesn't happen to us?
By doing no harm, essentially. No, but just to answer that, because I really think it's a really fascinating point, and we have seen it. In most cases, we really don't know for sure, with absolute certainty, that is, what caused these abandonments or kind of decimation of entire civilizations, right? But to some extent, I would argue, yes, it's a good learning case, but it really doesn't matter that much, because we're in a unique position, right? We've been talking about sustainability here, and most people think about sustainability as really, like about the future, about, preserving what will come next. But I think that's a half definition of sustainability. There's a other half that usually tends to get ignored, because sustainability really is a game of two halves, right? It's meeting the needs of the people today without compromising the needs of the people in the future, right? So that half of meeting today, I think, in itself is also a very important part of this equation, right? And we tend to kind of brush over it. And I would argue what we could do is focus on that, right? So let's say there's an inevitability, and an asteroid would hit Earth at some point, right? In a few billion years, I think we understand that the sun would basically swallow this planet, right?
Yes.
So we could fold our hands and then
do nothing
and wait for that.
Accept the fate of our forefathers, yes.
Or we could realize that there are 700 million people right now living in severe energy poverty. There's 1.3 billion people living right now.
Yes.
Exposed to desertification and drought. These ones, we can do something about them now.
Yes.
So what can we do? And I think that's really what should be our focus here.
I completely agree. But the reason why I thought it was important to bring it up, not only is our program called Artifact, in which, all of these human settlements contain many of those, but at the same time, there seems to be a pattern of human settlements, and there's almost like a life, there's like a time, like a kind of half-life for those cities. And apparently it's after the domestication of plants, and there's a certain stability when it comes to the stable, plant, availability. People start to domesticate animals that eat the plants, and then people start to consume the animals that keep on consuming more and more plants. Those plants need more land, they need more water, and then they're not really calculating for a world where resources are limited, and even on a small scale, without fossil fuel consumption. Without there being millions and millions of people, there is still, for some reason, whether it be disease, whether it be climate change, they were still left to having to abandon their urban centers. And so I think, the situation that we're in today is vastly different. We're more connected, we're more aware, we're more educated, we're more capable, sophisticated, we're more feasible as a species. But that's not to say that our ancient ancestors haven't gone through partially some of the issues and the problems that we're going through today by designing these cities for efficiency, yet overlooking how limited
basic resources
the resources are. And when you're planning these cities, are you planning for, a certain resource to be potentially deplenished or not available anymore? And is that also a part of the kind of the emergency scenarios that you've been trained for or studied or wrote about or perhaps even applied to some of the projects you've worked on?
No, yeah, absolutely. And when we design, so our kind of philosophy of sustainability, really, as I mentioned earlier, it's about serving the people of the needs of the people today, but also the most sustainable really is the one that lives the longest, right, and serves the longest with the minimum kind of use of energy. But going back to your question, I really think the answer is somewhere also buried in the question that you mentioned. It's really about connectedness. Because I think, and maybe there's no way to know for sure how interconnected those ancient civilizations were, because in most cases they lived in their own kind of bubble, right? And now we're basically the first ones to reach that level, but also we're a proper global civilization, right? Like there are chances, as we've seen with COVID a few years ago, how swift in most cases anyway, the response was on a global scale, right? We managed to learn from each other. We managed to expedite a lot of the mitigation processes, and I really think this interconnectedness, this kind of melting opportunity to be able to melt different ideas, different techniques, different artifacts, like you've mentioned, right? Is really what will give us a fighting chance, and this will allow us to not be, hopefully, because if we're going to be the last generation, if we're going to be a generation that kind of goes extinct, we'll possibly arguably be the last then, because this is the first time it's going to happen on a global scale, right? But in the words of someone I really absolutely love it, who does research on this stuff, Hannah Ricci, she wrote a book, Not the End of the World. Highly recommend that if you could read this. But she argues there that we are not necessarily going to be the last generation, but instead we might actually have the chance to be the first sustainable one. And we're seeing this in the development that's been made in sciences and in research, in physics and technology, and this direction. So if you look at the numbers, yeah, it does really look gloom there, but you look at the numbers, like people are actually arguably better than they were a few years ago, right? You look at mortality rates, refrigeration,
like running water,
absolutely,
being able to communicate with people from all over the world,
exactly, to learn from each other. So these are things that really didn't have a chance, didn't contribute to the fighting chance of all the civilizations. But in our case, we have this, and I think this will give us the edge.
I completely agree with you,
and I hope so. Yeah.
Abu Bakr, when it comes to some of Saudi Arabia's experience in balancing the need to urbanize and the need to preserve its cultural identity, its heritage, what success stories could you tell us about from your experience in Saudi Arabia?
Oof, endless, I would say. But really, I'm going to start with one of the most profound for me, because it was one of the first experiences I had coming when I first moved to the kingdom a few years ago. We went around Irga here in Riyadh. And it was a site visit, so we were just going there to inspect the site for a new project. It was extremely hot, as we know the Riyadh summers can get. But as soon as you go inside these old neighborhoods with the narrow sikas and the alleyways, it all of a sudden felt so cold and comfortable, almost as if it was air conditioned, when in reality it wasn't, right? And I think that's the answer to this, right? So again, these cultures in most cases, and I'm sure you would know as artifacts as well, didn't really start just because someone thought of it. They really started as a practical tool. So cultures formed as a reaction to, in most cases, geography, right? Same with architecture, same with different types of heritage. And this is exactly, I think, what is happening there. And for a while, we kind of lost that, because everybody was building skyscrapers, because this is what modernism required. But it's really been incredible to see in the last couple of years that, that these new projects are taking inspiration from older civilizations, from really the roots and heritage of the local place here. And I think, yeah, there's a couple of them. This is one of them, but also, as we've seen with the projects in AlUla, of course, just the beautiful experiences that you get there. I remember on one of my first visits, we were just completely amazed by the rocks formation, right, in Ula. And I think that was possible because of how well the architecture of the built environment really blends very nicely with the natural environment as well, right? And my friend that I was with was just taking pictures, and I remember I had to remind them, these rocks took 3 million years or 30 million years to form, right? They're not just something you post on Instagram.
Yes.
There's something you actually experience and you're amazed by, right? And the only reason we're able to do that now is because the way the built environment has been designed and has been built allows you to actually interact with these in a very seamless manner. And I think that's something that
It's so uninvasive.
exactly. That's the word. Yeah.
It's so uninvasive, and we have a dark skies initiative. We have kind of a quieter approach to mass transportation. I mean, these are all things that you could definitely appreciate as an urbanist. And let's take AlUla as an example. Let's say you were to build a city, brand new city, from scratch. What are the first things that you think you would consider whilst you're building a city from scratch?
Oh, so from scratch, just to clarify, so no artifacts?
No artifacts, just barren.
But artifacts
land.
really at the heart.
It's an arid
of a new
territory, yeah.
of a new civilization. Well, I mean, so firstly, it's going to be, I think, really about equity. So to make sure that the city that we're going to build really serves the widest spectrum of possible people without compromising other people's ability to, live a very comfortable and high quality of life, right? Secondly, it's about permeability. So most city designs is about how it integrates well with the neighboring context, but as well as the neighboring environment. So it's very easy to think of the desert as barren, right?
Yeah, or a blank canvas.
But in most cases, it really isn't. I mean, one of the most fascinating things I saw a while ago was this interrelationship, this dance between the Sahara Desert and the Amazon rainforest, right? Like the Amazon rainforest really relies
on the
Sahara to be able to survive and thrive.
Yes.
And we often think of the Sahara as barren without any nutrients.
Yes.
But I think, every land has its own kind of special type of beauty and richness, and it responds to love. And if you give it love, it will give you back love. So really that will be the second point. And then third,
the city of romance already. Cheers.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be. I've been told I'm a bit romantic. And then finally, as mundane as it sounds, is good governance.
100%.
Yeah, because really, for any kind of city or civilization to function, we need bureaucracy.
Yes.
To a certain level. We need guidelines, we need standards, we need these types of really robust frameworks of governance that allows people and systems to function properly, right? So if whatever you build, whatever you design, if there is no framework for actually ensuring sustainability of this, and I don't mean environmental sustainability, but I mean actual sustainability of a project, right? The way to guarantee this is through policy, is through ensuring that there's good governance. So there's going to be equity and within the city itself, but also the city is properly integrated with itself and also the surrounding context, and good governance.
Thank God you designed the city, because in my mind, I'm like, build the metro first. Build the underground metro first, and then everything on top of it.
Well, possibly that could be. It depends on what type of civilization.
Well, when I was playing SimCity, that's what I used to do. That's the way.
Oh, that's why you're not an architect, Joshua.
Thankfully. Ladies and gentlemen, this was our wonderful guest, Mr. Abu Bakr Garba, and he was such a great sport today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Joshua. Really, thank you for having me. I really appreciate what you're doing.
And it's been a pleasure to spend this time with you. And you're listening and watching Artifact here at AlUla FM, the sound of Arabia.
AlUla FM. The sound of Arabia.